All right, we are back. It's so good to be here.
Hello.
It's Sam and Emma back for another episode of Birth Middle Way. And yeah, we're pretty excited about today's conversation, I'd say.
I'm
We're having a little
stoked.
drop in. And it was kind of one on the waiting list, There's been some days where you weren't sure if it was the topic, and so I'm super excited to
Today
be
is the
here in a
day.
moment where, yeah, where it feels like a full fuck yes. I'm
Fuck
I'm all
yes.
about that. I'm all about that. As much as our no's, we need to work on that strong no. We need to work on that full yes. So really celebrating that as we dive into the conversation today. And so I think I'm just gonna, rather than presenting the topic, I'm just gonna start with the story that kind of generated the concept, and we'll go from there.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, the seed that kind of planted today's conversation came when I was having a conversation with two of my close friends, actually my sister and one of my best friends. We were just sitting on my parents' deck and just talking about our births and births in general. And then both my sister and my best friend actually happen to be pregnant right now with their second baby. So it's obviously a very relevant conversation as they prepare for their births. And we were exploring this theme and this experience that all three of us have had in different ways around how there can be shame in birth spaces, in birth communities, in birth circles, in women's circles and spaces for women who have been able to, activate or, birth at home in a healthy physiological way, in an undisturbed way.
Mhm.
And how, in the wake of someone else's birth trauma, it can be really hard to embody that experience and to really present that and hold that forward and allow for that to take up as much space as, someone's birth trauma, and allow for our stories to be shared in the wake of somebody else's birth trauma. My friend was specifically sharing an experience that she had had at a Blessing Way, where she was sharing her birth experience, and she birthed at home and in her home in Mexico. And yeah, when she shared her story, and there was no tearing, there was no complications, there was no disturbance, these things, there was a sister in the space who did get quite triggered. And um, yeah, of course, that's going to be a bit of a hard thing to hold in our humanness, right? Is especially if it's a woman that we care about. And of course, we can say like, oh well, everyone should just be able to hold their experiences, and that's their responsibility, X, Y, and Z. But the reality is on the human level, I really think that we care about our sisters, right? And we don't want to cause harm, we don't want to cause pain. And yet there is a certain pain as well in feeling like you can't share, right? Or like you can't celebrate. You can't celebrate this experience that you've had that was so beautiful, that is, the birth of your child. And yeah, so I shared with Emma, before we hit record, like, I'd love to talk about this topic, and specifically because there are certain layers of that that's come up for me, and I know on past episodes we're like, yeah, let's talk about Sam's birth stories, and there is a part of me that's like, like, is that the relevant thing to take up space? Is that the most important thing to be
Mm.
conversating about in this like podcast space? Because you know they they're they're just beautiful, like they're really actually in two births, I don't have anything that I would change really about those experiences. The way that I would speak about my births would be very much so in celebration and in gratitude and in joy for the different layers of those experiences. And specifically with my first birth, like my daughter was breech. And so this is, the more complicated pregnancy and birth. And for whatever reason, I had zero complication. I had zero tearing. I had zero issues. It was a very flawless and easeful and beautiful experience and emergence. And so it's just, to hold that, like hold that duality, hold that polarity, and hold all of the layers within that, right? It's like, yes, to, of course, my story should have space, but also yes to being considerate and aware of your experience, and just to bring it into you and I, and but speaking about the broader dynamic as well that many women feel, and it's
Yes,
like,
and yes to the responsibility on somebody with birth trauma to be in relationship to it, right? To
right,
show up and communicate when something feels really difficult or big, or when I need a moment and I need space. But the
right,
responsibility on, I'm in therapy, I'm
right,
doing the healing work, I am meeting it as much as I can all the time.
right,
So I can show up to my sisters as much as I am able to. And that's going to
right,
evolve and change as I grow and as time goes on, because I'm going to be in deeper, more integral, more intimate, more complex relationship with it. Some days it's going to be hard
right,
and some days it won't, you
right,
know.
right. And yeah, and so, of course, like, because I feel like we have a awareness around each other. We've both cultivated a lot of reflection practices in our life to be able to,
Mhm.
be aware of each other in these ways. Like, it is about checking in. Like, of course, in this conversation, there was I think 2 weeks ago was when I presented it to you, and you were in a process, multiple, like, kind of layers of processes that were throwing you off. And
Yeah. Oh yeah, I was.
and I presented the topic, and you're like, yeah, no,
Not
you
today.
can't go there.
Next topic. Something else.
Yeah, moving right along, exactly, right? And so I mean, like, having that dynamic, allows, and for, like, we can both meet each other in that,
Hmm.
and I can, lead with that awareness. And but it's so, I just see it so slippery, and so delicate, and I can just see how easy it really would be for this to create severance in relationships between women
Right.
who don't have those same, like, awarenesses and orientations towards reflection and consideration, and respect of both processes, and just being curious and open to, like, when the right moment is for everything to take up space, right?
Well, and can they both exist,
Right.
right, in the same
But not
space?
always.
And
They
not
can't
always.
always,
Yeah.
right? Because, like, it would be disrespectful, it would be bulldozing, it would be unkind and very inconsiderate if, you were to be in some moment of deep grief around your experience, and for me to start talking about my birth,
Right.
right?
Right.
So, like, yeah, and of course for us it's like, what, but that would just wouldn't happen. But we also have to remember that, like, there's such a massive spectrum in terms of where people are at in their psychology and their understanding of communication skills, reflecting about themselves, reflecting about others, like, really considering how their words might impact, like,
Well,
not
and
everyone is in that.
right, and when it comes to trauma too, it's really insidious and really sneaky, where sometimes somebody will say something and all of a sudden
Right,
I shut down, and my partner
right,
will look over and he's like, just hand on my knee or hand on my hand, and just
right.
he notices. Not everybody's
Of
going to
course.
notice. And I
Right.
can't necessarily take myself out of it because I get
Hmm.
slammed so hard and I'm
Right,
not prepared for, like, oh, hey, you're going to get triggered really deeply right now. And I'm like,
right.
and I can't even communicate it because I go into such a shutdown, and it's so primal and it
Exactly.
happens
Right,
so fast. And so I
right.
want to also uh, just ask that you share a little bit more about how that story at the Blessing Way ended, because when you were talking with me just before we hit record, you had said that the woman got triggered and she, I think, stood
I
up and
think I
left.
think she left the space.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And
Yeah.
that left,
And
was
I
it your
left
sister?
my friend,
Your
that
friend,
left my best friend to,
to
yeah, I
feel
mean,
what?
just feel like she caused that pain, that discomfort, and that
Right,
it probably would have been easier to just keep her mouth shut and not share her story.
right. And so the context of this was they were at a Blessing Way. She was sharing this positive birth experience because it was
Because she'd been asked specifically
right,
as well,
right.
She'd been asked about her birth by another woman,
Yeah.
and then, when she shared, and And women are like, wait, but there was no tearing, there was no, this. And
Hmm.
she's just like, no. And, my mom was there every day to make me soup after and to brush my hair.
Yeah.
And, nobody entered my house for weeks on end. And I was just in this blissful bubble. And it's
Hmm.
just like, for a woman who's had close to the exact opposite of that experience, like, it's hard to hear.
It is. It totally is. And I mean, before we hit record, I was like, I have so much to say, and I do, because if I was
Yeah.
sitting like heart to heart, knees to knees with this friend of yours, I mean, for myself, I've been inviting in triggers. I'm like, please trigger me. That's okay.
Right.
I'm gonna be triggered by things I expect to be triggered by and things that I don't.
Right.
This is now a part of me and a part of my journey and a part of my story. And I don't want anyone to censor themselves. Of course, if the conversation is relevant, if I'm on the floor and I'm having a process and I'm crying, I don't need to hear your birth story in that moment because that's not the
Right. Of course.
context of like,
Right.
why would that
Right.
come up? But if I'm attending a blessing way, number one, it's my responsibility to know that I'm going to a blessing way where people are talking about becoming a mother, about birth, about all of these things. And there will be likely many triggers, especially for me. Like, my son passed away. Like, my birth is, as traumatic
Extreme.
as you can make it, apart from me not dying. Um, but yeah, there's this responsibility on the person with the trauma to know the spaces that they're entering, right? And recognizing, hey, do I have like tools in place or exercises in place to know that like I might be triggered in this area that I'm going in this event?
Right.
And maybe I can have somebody next to me that I can be like,
Right.
hey, would you be a support person in this moment? Could
Right.
I, maybe I could even talk to the woman that had the blessing way to leave, but if like just to say, hey, I might remove myself if it's
Right.
too much, but
Right.
communicating that. But I mean, to your friend, I would just honestly say, like, it's okay that you triggered somebody. And I can't speak on
Right.
behalf of the woman that was triggered.
It's triggered, right,
Like,
of
I
course.
won't do that, but we can't take responsibility for someone else being triggered
Right.
because then we wouldn't say anything.
Right.
We wouldn't be able to do anything because we
Right.
do trigger people. And the
Right.
trigger itself is not bad, right? There is unprocessed trauma, there is pain, there is sorrow, and that's allowed to exist,
Exactly.
right? And that
I
doesn't
mean,
take
it's
away
it's
from your
it is a
positive
reflection.
experience.
Right, right. And I mean, to bring it back to our last episode, like that is the moment where there is like our triggers, I like the semantic of like our triggers are our treasures if we're willing to allow them to be that, right? Because they are calling us forward. They are calling us
I like
into
that.
processing, into really meeting ourselves.
Our triggers
And
are our treasures. I really
yeah,
like that.
yeah, no, it's great. It is like, and
Good.
because the invitation is to become friends with it, right? And that's exactly
Yeah.
what you're saying. And I would just also, present the perspective that that's a really wise orientation. And, that shows me again the level of work that you are doing and also the level of support that you've activated in your field. Like
Right.
it's like, okay, you're going to therapy. So you have a container for you to go and intentionally process those triggers. You
Mhm.
aren't left trying to figure it all out yourself or feeling like you're drowning in waters that are too difficult to navigate
Yeah.
because of many different layers. And I don't necessarily think that that's fairly, normal in the circles that you and I walk in,
Yeah.
but I wouldn't say that that's necessarily normal across the board of the Western culture and Western
Oh,
society.
I mean, I spoke to people that also experienced stillbirth, and I shared the story of my friend and I who had a daughter. She free birthed her daughter. It went very smoothly, like 12-hour labor in total, but like 6 hours of intense labor. Baby's healthy. She was healthy. Like it all went really well.
Right.
And after Floyd passed away, I see this moment so clearly in my mind where I like was not in my body. And we were laying on my bed and she was nursing her daughter and I'm holding Floyd's ashes in my arms and we are both bawling our eyes out. And she just kept saying, it's not fair. It's not fair. And I was like, but would it be fair if it happened to you?
Right.
Like, who would it be fair if it happened to you? Because these things happen.
Right.
When would it be fair? It's not
Right.
going to be. And we just held each other and we cried. And we looked at
Mm.
this baby in her arms. And it was this like complex and difficult, beautiful moment. And the women that I shared that story with that have had stillbirths are like, how did you do that
Right.
while you were a few weeks, 3, 4 weeks
Right.
after Floyd passed? Like, how could you do that? And I was like, well, my friend Eden and myself, we cultivated that in our relationship, right? Where there could be beauty and grief and anger and all of these complex human things. We
Right.
could allow them to be present. We didn't have to make them bad or good or mean anything. We could just let the humanity be there. And the
Right.
humanity of it is that it's difficult and it doesn't feel fair. And it feels really fucked up that
Right.
I'm holding my baby, but he's ashes in a bag and we were pregnant together. That's a really fucked up thing, you know?
Right.
And I look back on those moments and I'm like, but I'm glad I showed up to that. And I'm glad that she was courageous enough to not feel, and she was respectful. Like, I'm the one that invited her to bring her daughter and, sit in the bed with me and lay down and, but I'm grateful that she was courageous enough and transparent enough to show up in her journey of motherhood. Because in her just being her, I felt like I was allowed to just be me. And then in me just being me, that allowed her to just be her in our fullness and the complexities. And I
Right.
wasn't able to go to her daughter's first birthday. I could not
Right.
bring myself to do that. And I
Mm-hmm.
told her, and she was like, don't worry. Like, it's
Totally
all
understand.
beautiful. Yeah. And then her and I and Flora, I think, went to the park where we did something just ourselves. Um, but yeah, like, I think there's a big piece of, can we show up with authenticity in the way that we articulate what we're feeling inside
Right.
when we can, to say, hey, I'm feeling like I don't know if I want to share my positive birth story because I don't want to trigger you, but I also want to celebrate this and I want to have this conversation about birth with you. And I know that it's going to potentially bring some stuff up for you, but I love you and I want to be considerate. Even saying that is like,
Right.
thank you. And I know that my tears, if we need to pause, are also welcome. And it's like, hey, can we just take a minute? Because
Right.
there's a bit of grief coming in. And then, if I can articulate that and then cry, and emotions really only last so long if we let them move through us, and then we can continue, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's the relationship, that's the dialogue, that's the middle way, that's the flow, is can we allow for both? And I know in
Right.
my experience there hasn't really been many spaces that have welcomed grief such as this. And on the other side, there aren't really spaces that welcome celebration and joy, such as the stories like you have of
Right.
really positive birth experiences,
Right. And
right?
it's such, like as you're sharing, it's interesting. Like what's coming up for me is like this like influx of women who are sharing their positive free birth stories, and
Hmm.
like screaming them from the rooftops on the platforms of social media, Instagram, these different spaces from this place of I want other sisters to experience this. Like I need to share my story because I need to remind women that this is possible, like the Free Birth Society podcast is really that. And I've heard from so many women how beneficial that space of storytelling has been for them, to just hear multiple stories of success, of it's possible and it does happen every day. And you know, the truth, a very delicate truth, you know, is that it does happen successfully more than not.
Right. Well, and it's interesting because that semantic of I want to share my story from the rooftops because this is my story. This happens.
Right,
That's those were my words. Those are my
right,
words. I just was interviewed by
right,
the Guardian newspaper, and that's what I said.
right.
I said I haven't heard a story like mine, and people need to know that this
Hmm.
reality exists.
Right,
And can all of that exist? Can all of that
right,
be allowed to take up space? Because
right,
it is completely true. Birth usually flows really
right,
well with minimal intervention. Free
right.
birth a lot of the time works really well. But when it doesn't, those
Most
stories
of the
get
time.
sensationalized. Exactly. And
Right.
and so it is really interesting. I mean it and
And that's an interesting thing, you know, for you to say sensationalized. And it brings, I feel like I want to share this statistic and just like explore it in conversation with you as well, you know, because it is this interesting back and forth, and it is this like this piece of polarity that we've been intending to navigate in this conversational space as a whole, you know, is like what is real and true.
mm,
And it's like there is this thread of every woman only knows her truth, right? And her experience, and every story is valid and should take up space. But we have to realize that there are people that are carrying more shadowy orientations, right? And in the extremes of both polarities. And so,
can you
you
give
know, speaking,
examples of what?
I'm going to,
Oh yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Let me
Let
elaborate
me
here.
go ahead.
So, you know, looking at the Free Birth Society, we have them, you know, icing out these stories of, you know, stillbirth and these types of things. And we've highlighted and talked about this theme and
Mm,
how, you know, that creates an echo chamber. And in the same breath, we have women who are, you know, worshipers of the system and really believe that that is the path and that is the only safe path, and that if you do not walk that path, you are putting your life at risk, your baby's life at
mhm,
risk, it's irresponsible, X, Y, and Z, right? And so in both spaces, from a polarized perspective, we are going to have each polarized group reaching for the opposite story to confirm their bias, to confirm their belief.
confirmation bias.
Exactly. And so, you know, specifically that where you're like, yeah, there's people that latch on to these like experiences every single time like a baby dies in
Yeah.
an intentional free birth space. It's like, you know, that whole mob comes out of like, see, this is so dangerous. You're putting your life at
Yeah.
risk. This woman
Exactly.
tried to free birth and her baby's dead. And, you know, we have this extreme like
Everyone
echoing
else
of
was just
that.
lucky.
Every single other person was just lucky. And on the same flip, you know, like the Free Birth Society wanting to avoid actually meeting the truth that, like, yes, most of the time physiological undisturbed birth works. And the reality is it doesn't always, and it won't always, you know, because it's too nuanced and complicated and mysterious for us to really have a pathway at this point in our evolution and consciousness to guarantee that every life passes through that canal alive, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And so it brings me to this statistic I'd love to share, and this is from a man that I would love to have on the podcast. I've been in a little bit of conversation with him. His name is Dr. Bill Chun on Instagram. His handle is Dr. Bill Billchun. And he is really awesome at just sharing statistics, honestly, and like being like, okay, you know, like let's break down the semantic of your chance of a stillbirth doubles after 40 weeks. And what does that really mean, you know?
Mm.
And so he has this post, and it says stillbirth, stop using 5.5 per 1,000 to scare women, because that number, it doesn't mean what they say it means.
Okay, are you going to break down that number a little
Yeah,
bit? Because I have
yeah,
no idea what that means.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Let me elaborate. So the famous 5.48 per 1,000 birth, that stat, it includes all fetal deaths from 20 weeks on. Yes, even extremely premature, lethal abnormalities, high risk unmanaged pregnancies. It's a blunt national average, not a reason to pressure healthy women at term. The real numbers by week. Let's talk actual risk at term. 37 weeks, it is 0.21 per 1,000 live births.
And where are these numbers? Is this global? Is this from the States? Is this, do we know?
I think he's American. I think these are screenshots I'm looking at. Let's see. I'm going to read the whole post and then we can see what he's saying. So at 30 weeks, it's 0.27 per 1,000,
Mhm.
39.35, 40 weeks, 0.42, and 41 weeks, 0.5. So you still have a half of a 0.5 of a chance out of 1,000 live births. So I don't know exactly what that percentage. Oh yeah, under 0.06% at 41 weeks of a stillbirth.
Mhm.
Under 0.06% at 41 weeks, right? And so to actually understand these statistics, right? And that doesn't change the reality for the person that is that 0.06%, how real that is, right? Like
Mhm.
that's you. You live in that percentile, you know? And so why the number is so high? Because the system bundles everything from 40 to 42 weeks. And guess what? 20 to 23 weeks equals over 500 stillbirths per 1,000. So
Yeah.
half of that statistic is accounting for babies that actually can't sustain life outside of the womb.
That would
I
need,
think, what do we,
and like an
that,
incubator or whatever it would be.
I mean, well, at 23 weeks, what we went over that in one of the last podcasts, there's been like a
Hmm.
couple of babies that have survived at
Yeah.
that gestation
Yeah.
in all of our history. Like it's a
Yeah.
very, very, very low chance that a baby will survive that,
Yeah.
right?
Wild.
So like the women that I personally know in my field, I know multiple women. I think I know of two women in my field who have had infant losses around the 20 weeks, 20 and slightly after 20 week, and they call that a miscarriage themselves. They speak the semantic. I had a miscarriage
Okay.
at 20 weeks.
Mm.
It's not I had a stillbirth. And I think that actually, to really be classifying a stillbirth as like a full-term baby,
Mhm.
like that's how when you say the word stillbirth, that's how for sure I heard it before, like seeing these stats. That's how I know most women hear it. A stillbirth is a fully gestated
Yeah, like
baby that
35 plus.
plus.
Yeah, I would say.
Exactly.
Yeah. But
Exactly,
that's
right?
not the actual definition. I think the actual definition is 20 weeks onwards,
Exactly, that's
right?
what I'm
That's what
saying.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
that's what he's saying.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so to understand, and then so to say that, so um so when they quote 5.5 per 1,000 without context, they're leaning on preterm tragedy to justify full-term control.
Right.
That's
And like
semantic.
induction or cesarean.
Exactly.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Exactly. They're fear-mongering women to like your baby
Hmm.
could die,
Well,
but we're
and that,
talking about a 0.06%
yeah.
chance at 41 weeks.
Well, and so this is what the doctors told me contributed to Floyd's passing was they said, well, you went into labor at 41 and a half, 42 weeks. And I'm like, okay, I was born at 41 and a half weeks.
Right.
How does that contribute? It puts the baby in distress more, but how? How do you know that? Does it? Like you don't actually
Well, there's
know if
different
baby was
things,
in
right?
distress, but like this was where I'm not saying that they were incorrect. I'm
Right.
just wanting more information because
Right,
that's
of
how my
course.
brain works. I'm curious. I'm like, please tell me more
Right.
about how you got to that answer,
Right.
you
Exactly.
know?
Exactly. And like, yeah, I mean, there's different things, like the
Hmm.
placenta deteriorating, placental health, like there's a lot of things that can
Hmm.
go into, and it's not to diminish, right? Like I don't share the statistic to diminish your experience and the reality that for
Hmm.
every mother who has lived the experience of a stillbirth, a true stillbirth, and has held her full-term baby in her hands, who is, has passed on, like how real that is. And that's her whole world, like to become that statistic. And I know that, like that you've met that of like, why me? Why my son? Like, like I trusted birth and I trusted my body and I'm a healthy woman and why am I the 0.06%?
It's not, yes,
Like
it's not common, but it is. It,
right. I mean,
like, and
well, I mean, and that's where I think it's important, because I wanted to bring this into the podcast space because like I feel like we've spoken into, but it is common. And I just want to be clear for our audience and listeners,
mhm,
because I also don't want to be perpetuating unnecessary fear for women to
no.
think that like because Emma has had this experience and because, you've in having this experience, of course you're going to attract other women into your field who can relate to that so that you can heal together and share
Mhm.
together and support one another. Like that's very natural. And so for you, it's going to be like in the wake of that
Louder.
experience, it's going to louder. It's going to seem like it's more frequent because you're going to have maybe, 20, 50, 100 women who have also had that experience. And then it seems quite prevalent.
Well,
But
and
at the end of the day, it's still a
oh, you
0.06%
still have
chance.
99% women that are pregnant, their baby, they go into labor, baby comes out, it's good. But it is,
99.94%.
yeah, but it is interesting for me because I remember after, like right after Floyd passed, I was like, what are the chances that my brother was stillborn and two generations
Right.
before my uncle died when he was 8, my great uncle died when he was 5. Like,
Right.
what are the fucking chances that my son dies, that I also have a stillbirth? This is like, what? It's not
I mean,
common, but like, excuse me, like what? Like just
right.
the like what
Exactly.
the fuck
Exactly.
moments that are like I
For sure.
still have that I'm like,
Right.
why me? What are the fucking chances? Like what? What?
I know. I
What?
know.
Like it
And for
just
me, when I hear that, it's like I can't go into any other space other than like why from the spiritual lens. It
yeah, me
takes me
too.
into spirituality.
Me too.
Like the fact that that theme would be in multiple generations, like
And all
and like
boys.
of course there's going to be so much nuance and it's very hard to speak about spiritual concepts like, you know, in a podcast setting where
Mhm,
we're going to have such a spectrum of spiritual beliefs, and
mhm,
so like all I can do is like relate to that from my own spiritual beliefs, and that's
mhm.
where it takes me when I hear that. I'm like, there is there's something happening in your lineage is
Totally.
like,
Mhm,
that's it for me. It feels clear, crystal clear, like, and I don't, and still we can't know or fully understand the why behind that, right?
yeah.
Like, and still why, okay,
Mhm,
but like there's a theme intergenerationally
yeah.
happening there, and it's like it's the same thing, like, okay, like to take it out of a traumatic theme, it's like why do twins run in certain families,
Total, yeah.
right?
Like it is bizarre. I mean, and the fact that they were all boys that died in my family, like it's
Right.
just like,
Right.
what?
I guess there's a more of a genetic reason for twins, so let me just back up that fully and catch myself because there's going to be
Totally.
people like those don't fully connect and they don't fully connect,
Yeah,
but like just
but
like
still.
these, I don't know, these different themes, like they're, yeah, it's very
Well,
interesting.
even looking back on my medical records, the doctors wrote that Floyd died on February 29th. He was
Uh-huh.
born on the 3rd.
Uh-huh.
My uncle died on February 29th. This isn't just like, oh, they
That's
died on the
crazy.
same day.
That's
It's a
crazy.
leap year.
Wow.
That day
The
doesn't
fuck? Oh my God!
exist.
How did I not just make that connection?
That
What
day doesn't
the?
exist 75% of
Emma,
the
that's
time.
insane. That is
Like,
crazy.
what the fuck? What the fuck? Like, that's,
Yeah.
you
Yes.
know, you know,
Seriously.
Okay,
Wow.
but just to bring this back to this original concept and discussion that we're having, I want to share a little bit about my Earth Daughters experience. Earth
Please.
Daughters is a women's festival that has been going on for, I think, 5 years, not very long, in British Columbia. And I held a circle called Sanctuary where it was a space for women who've experienced child loss, stillbirth, miscarriage. And my intention was that there needs to be a space for us to be seen, to be acknowledged, if just by each other, in a festival, in a space that is for women, because this is a quintessential female experience of pregnancy loss, being pregnant, losing your baby. It's a different journey for a father, but as a woman to create something with your body and have it die, whether it dies inside of you and the baby passes within, or the baby passes after birth, or you have a child that dies later on. I'm that you came from me, you were inside of me, and now you're gone. Like it's a weird experience, right? And so
Right.
I felt that, in spaces where there is only women present, where there are only women present, and pregnancy is celebrated, and motherhood is revered and honored, and all of these things happen, there needs to be intentional space for women who've experienced death in this motherhood woman capacity. And it was profound and beautiful. And on one of the days, there was a woman who was doing like an Aphrodite dance, and it was beautiful. And she was pregnant. And I was there for a little bit. And then I was like, oh my God, I need to go. And I just walked away and
Mhm.
I was in tears. And I just sat in a grove of trees and was like, okay, I need to be with this Earth Mother because I don't
Right.
want to make this beautiful dance that is honoring and celebrating the light of pregnancy and birth and motherhood about me and my process. And I felt to be with the earth, who I knew without a shadow of a doubt understood the death of her children because she has seen extinctions and floods and fires. And she knows she is death.
Right.
And she is a being and someone that I have felt very safe to share my grief with because she knows life and she knows death. She is the ultimate mother, right? But as you shared your story of this blessing way and having this one sister getting up and leaving because she was really triggered, I'm like, I know that feeling. And I oscillate between this experience of like, can I sit and not make it about me, but still let my tears be present? And maybe I'm shaking a little bit, maybe I'm crying, you know?
Right.
And I've experienced that in ayahuasca ceremonies too, where I'm like, okay, just sit and be with it. And I'm shaking and crying and vomiting and like,
Right. For sure.
moving through these processes, but I am committed to being here because it is a ceremony. And anything can be ceremony.
Right.
But sometimes in an ayahuasca ceremony, you get up and you go outside to pee because you need to pause for a second and you go and you do what you need to do and then you come back. And I think in these spaces where women gather, whether it's blessing ways or, my friend hosted a red thread cutting ceremony after Floyd died. I think I was still in a coma. Um, or whatever it might be, but like any like women's circles, whatever it is, wherever women gather, I think the consciousness needs to shift because it's not about shrinking down your celebratory, beautiful moments of birth or marriage or anything that it might be. It's recognizing that we all have different stories and our positive and negative stories touch each other. When we brush up on a person, we don't know that they have a bruise on their arm. It might it might make them flinch a little bit, you know, and
Right.
that's okay. Like, can we
Right.
shift the consciousness where these things are okay to coexist?
Right.
And I don't know how to
Right.
do that. I think conversation is a
Yeah,
good place to
exactly.
start, and I know
Right.
for myself, the relationships that I've cultivated have allowed for that,
Right.
and there has been a lot of dialogue around like, hey, I might leave the room for a moment, or I might end up sitting and spontaneously start crying. But that doesn't mean stop what you're doing. That doesn't mean what
Right.
you're doing is wrong. It just means I've got some shit that's coming out and I'm in a process. But it's not
Right, but
about
that's
you.
what it means for you,
Right.
right? And I think that
Right.
that's like an important thing to highlight in having the
Yes.
conversation, right? Because it's like, yeah, you said like how do we actually like, what are the answers? What are the solutions? And you say starting with conversation and it's like and individual contemplation, but
Right.
like we can't push people into a process of integration that they're unwilling to meet. And I think that the reality of the world that we live in is that we have a bit of an epidemic of women who are who are traumatized from birth processes
Yeah.
who haven't integrated and haven't met their birth experiences. And that
Right.
goes back to like our mothers and grandmothers generations. Like,
And we live in a world right now that I've noticed, and this might come across as harsh. So,
I was gonna say this. I already know I was gonna make this
what?
point.
But trigger warning?
You make it.
Okay.
Yes.
Like, I don't do those.
No.
I don't like trigger warnings. Like, I
I
don't. I'm not
literally,
okay with it
yeah, I
because,
know.
like, and this is a bit selfish. Maybe this is my ego, but like, I didn't get a trigger warning before my son died.
Right,
I just met it. And that for
right,
me is human. I don't know if this is my Capricorn nature. I don't know what it
right,
is, but it's like, what about reality? What about meeting reality and the difficulties and the spontaneous triggers that just happen? And
right,
yeah, it's hard. I'm not saying it's not going to be hard. And of
right,
course, our birth, when we're processing our birth, if it's very traumatic, a lot of the time it's touching on, like you said, that ancestral piece of like, well, what was your mother's birth and your mother's birth and your mother's birth? And like when my mom was born, she was the 11th born. And from what I've heard, the stories, she came out really fast. I was
right,
born really smooth, 5 hour labor, no big issues or hiccups, like really easy.
right.
And so I'm not processing necessarily generational birth trauma in that capacity. Like I come from like women that have had pretty easeful births. I come
Right.
from ancestral grief, like that's my stuff. But this is where, trigger warnings for me, I'm sure, like, I'm not saying don't ever put trigger warnings on anything, but I don't.
Right. Right. Well, it brings up the thread that it connects to for me really is the also like the problem that I see in today's society that like, I will just call it what it is like this coddling of each other's potential triggers that like I just think is deeply unproductive.
Yes. Say
Like,
this
how dare
again.
you? How dare you say that to me? How dare you
Yes.
do that? How dare you? You're hateful because you think that way or because you're willing to say that thing. And it's like my truth is my truth, and what that brings up for you
Hmm.
is actually yours to hold. And like the thing is like I watch myself in my own inner world, and like on certain topics I like feel fiery and fierce about that.
Hmm.
But in the wake of birth and birth trauma, because that's like I walk as a birth worker and I want to be so aware of all of the women that I serve and interact with,
Hmm.
and I want to cause the least amount of harm specifically in that space and in the world. Like there's just certain other topics where like for me the pendulum swung too far, and it's like, no, I need to be fierce about this because that is my highest expression of love, because it's gone too far already, and the
Hmm.
harm that's being perpetuated in these dynamics and in these orientations of, like silencing people that disagree with certain ideologies.
Yeah.
It's like I just can't get down with it. I refuse to get down with it. And so
Hmm.
that brings up more this fiery part of my personality. And so to just, like I'm not saying any of that is good or bad or wrong or, wrong or right, or it's just it is what it is. I'm
Hmm.
just sharing like to observe myself, and to observe my inner orientations in these different realms and different
Hmm.
topics. And I, like the pendulum in terms of what's perpetuating birth trauma has swung far too far, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
I
And
agree.
that's, where I really want to be orienting a lot of these conversations and be, asking these questions, and hopefully with more professionals and the things in the system,
Hmm.
because I do definitely, as I've shared in past episodes, hold the belief that more perpetuation of harm and trauma is happening
Hmm.
within system care. And that does not mean at all that it's not happening in home birth, free birth, midwife care, licensed, unlicensed, wise woman, doula, whatever. It
Hmm.
does not mean that harm is, and for sure it is. And those things also deserve to be
Hmm.
talked about, and to have space, But yeah, it's just, it can't be that we're silenced. And, to bring it back to women and like
Hmm.
us walking each other home as sisters
Hmm.
and as mothers, sisters in the mothering experience, I cannot help but orient towards consideration
Yeah.
and intentionality, and that intentionality being rooted in how do I take up my space? Because at the end of the day, I do believe that and you know, I'm so open to sharing with you and to sharing my stories in this space. And it's not like I've ever been in a moment where it's like I'm not gonna do that,
Mhm.
you know, but I have been in contemplation of like how and when
Right. Is
is
this
the
the
most
day?
is this the most relevant
Yes.
moment to approach it and to allow for it to
Mhm.
take up space, specifically in the wake of your extreme unique situation, right? Like and that needs to be part of consideration in order for us to even, you know, have the
Mhm.
quality of relationship to be able to present this project to the world,
Yeah.
you know? Like, and so it's like there's so many nuanced layers to it, but I absolutely advocate against continuing to perpetuate the idea that our silence and keeping our truth to ourselves and keeping our mouths shut because it might hurt somebody else's feelings
Mhm.
is not the most productive path.
Right.
If we, you know, like, I just, it's really dangerous, you know, and I can see it in the world how dangerous
Yeah.
it is and how we've silenced a lot of
Mhm.
people.
Right. Well, and I think there's that line of like being considerate and trigger warning, right? Like I don't
Yeah,
ever want to swing to the trigger warning, but I
right.
also understand that piece of like, hey, I'm letting you know that this is like I'm prefacing what I'm going to say because I want you to know that I am considering you, that I do
Right.
love you, and I want to share my story. You know, just like
Right.
if I'm feeling like I need to vent or something, sometimes I'll call my mom. I'm like, "Hey, do you have space for this right now? Like I need to like get something out and like, just talk like I just,
Right.
I have no words for it right now, but I'll ask her like, "Do you have space for this? Do I
Right.
have permission to share this with you?" And it's
Right.
not anything big or whatever, but like I don't want to throw my stuff on to her, if she's getting
Right.
ready to do something and sometimes she says yes, sometimes she says no, sometimes she says, "Oh, thanks for the heads up. I'm ready now." You know?
Right.
And
Right.
for me that's just an act of love. Like I love you and I'm considering what your day is and
Right.
recognizing like, "Hey, maybe this just isn't the time for you or the space for you."
Right.
And I think that's important. And I think that piece of relationship and forging that together as women, as sisters, as mothers and daughters and grandmothers and community is that key piece because silencing isn't going to help, and I've seen
Right.
women silencing their grief my entire life where
Of
they
course.
feel
Right.
emotional
That's a very valid
and they
thread for
swallow
sure.
their grief or
Mhm.
they get emotional and they walk away because they don't want to share their tears with the world, right?
Right.
Because again, we live in this space where if I'm crying or if someone's crying, it's, oh my God, what can I do? Stop everything. Let's make them feel better.
Right.
But what if it's not about making someone feel better? What if tears and grief can exist at the same time that someone is sharing a really positive journey? And we don't need to make it about the person that's crying. We can just let the tears fall because they're beautiful and they're allowed to exist and they will pass, they will stop because they
Right.
do, while still listening to a sister's really beautiful story and not silencing her because I experienced something difficult. Because in my
And
difficult experience, that is all that I wanted. That is all that I prayed for. I prayed for a healthy birth, healthy baby, healthy
right.
mother, and I didn't receive that. But that prayer was answered in you. That prayer was
Right.
answered in every other sister that has experienced that. And if I can sit reverently at her feet and listen to that story, even if tears fall, even if I'm
Right.
shaking, but
Right.
still honor that and be like, oh my God, you are the answer to my prayer, even if
Right.
I didn't get to experience that myself.
And it's like how wise you are to be able to get there, my love.
And I can't always, like, I walk away from things, like I just shared that I walked away from a woman that was
Right.
dancing, had nothing to
No,
do
I
with me,
know.
you know?
I know, but it's just like you know, like it's like when you paint that picture of like you sitting in a circle and like hearing a woman share her birth story and like can can my tears and my grief, even if I'm shaking a little bit, like not interrupt the story? And it's like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know that it can, because I think in our humanness, there is just like an innate awareness that like grief needs to be held.
Yeah.
And so, at the bare minimum, I think that there does need to be a pause and there needs to be a check in of like, hey, do you need anything?
Right.
Because at the end of the day, like, yes, I think that there needs to be spaces and ways in which that mother that is sharing her beautiful story to be celebrated. Like,
Hmm.
yes to that. And, like, if she's sitting there holding her living baby in her hands at her breast while her sister is across the circle, empty handed, in tears, I think that most women would pause and be like, this isn't my moment. Like, my experience actually isn't
The most
the most
important
important
thing.
in this moment. And I think that, like,
And that
there
doesn't
has
feel
to,
fair
the
either.
but like and like then it's like, well, like when does it become fair, and like what is
What is
fair,
fair?
and
Yeah.
like because it isn't fair. And it like brings me back to that moment with you and your friend in your bed, and
Yeah.
like when you were sharing that, I was like, oh, like I feel that so deeply, and understand the tenderness, and like I was putting myself into her shoes actually, of like, oh, like the sincerity of like her grief, but like my question was like, does her grief for you undulates so far that she feels like guilty for the life of her child?
Right.
And like, I pray not.
I
I pray
pray
not to
not.
that sister,
Yeah.
if you're listening, like, I pray that you've never
Yeah.
got to the point in standing next to a dear friend whose baby has been lost that you feel guilty that you're for the life of your child, right? And so it's just like, oh,
Yeah.
it's
I don't think I mean, maybe she has. I'd love to. I actually asked her if she would come on the podcast.
yeah, it'd
And
be
I think
epic
she
to
will
have
because
her.
her story is such a positive
Right.
experience. And it actually, when she, when I found out she was pregnant, when I found out she gave birth, it was a really intense day for me. And I'll have to share that story when she comes on because it foreshadowed a lot of what had happened like afterwards.
Uh-huh. Okay.
But she had a really positive birth experience and she free birthed and her daughter was healthy. And I remember just crying. I cried for 3 days because I was so excited. I was like, oh my
Hmm.
God, see, like this is amazing. Oh my God, she's here. Oh my God. Like I just couldn't stop crying for three
Right.
days. I mean, I was hormonal, but like,
It's
you know,
super extremely hormonal.
but like in my experiences of hearing other women, and like I said, I can't always, I haven't been able to go to certain babies' birthday parties because I'm like,
Right.
I can't do that right now. Like, that's just
Right.
not, I can't. Um, and while I'm open to being triggered, and while I've always throughout this journey, and even historically, I'm like, trigger me, it's okay. Like, don't feel bad if you trigger me just by existing and being you. Like that's, if you do something intentionally that's hurtful, like, and even if you do trigger me, we can talk about it, we can discuss it.
Right.
But like, I don't shy away from triggers because the
Right.
trigger is not the issue. The issue is that I have pain that still exists in my being.
Right.
And that's bringing that up. And that's okay that it's bringing that up. The
Right.
sun triggered me, but the sun's not doing anything wrong. You know
Right.
what I mean? Like I was mad at
How
the
dare you
sun.
shine so
I was
bright?
angry at the spring. I'm like, why is the snow melting? Fuck you, spring. Like, why is time moving on? Like, I was mad for a long time about
Right.
that. And
Right.
I'm not mad at the season. I was just mad. But
Right.
in my experience of gathering in circles, anytime the tears come, sometimes there's been a pause. And I appreciate that pause. But sometimes it's just been a matter of like I'm sitting and I start crying and just a friend holds my hand or my
Right.
partner holds my hand and the
Right.
conversation keeps going and the tears
Right.
stop,
But that's
you
still
know,
some level of acknowledgement, right? And it
100%, but it doesn't stop the
have to be from
conversation.
everyone, right?
Exactly. It's just like
Right.
a hand on my back and I'm like, okay, thank you. Or like somebody across the circle that looks at me and just says, just whispers it while the person keeps
Right.
talking. And so
Right.
just that little bit, because in
Right.
some of these circles, not everyone knows my story. In some of these
Right.
circles, everyone knows my story. But
Right.
that doesn't mean things need to stop or cease completely,
Right.
or the attention of every single human needs to be taken from this really beautiful experience that
Right.
a woman is sharing, you know?
Right.
And again, and I'm not saying this to be like, this is the way, the only way. Like, no, I'm just saying these have been my lived experiences and they
Right.
have felt good. And I've debriefed this with the different women in the circle, and they were like, wow, that was really beautiful. Or, I'm glad that this could coexist. And it's been lovely if everyone was truthful in the debrief from all lenses, right? It wasn't good or bad, it just was.
Right.
And that's the complexity of, I think, being a woman. Being a woman is amazing and it's beautiful, and we can have multiple orgasms, but we can also have period pain and like difficult labors and like, you know what I mean? Like
Right.
it's not one thing. We're very cyclical. We hold all of it. Like every woman
Right.
holds death every time we bleed,
Right.
you know.
Totally. Totally. Yeah, and so I think, like the point that you're driving home there is like some level of acknowledgement, right? And I
Mhm.
think that that is like the important thing is that like because culturally we struggle to hold grief, right? And so, to just it doesn't have to be so complicated. It doesn't have to be so complex. It can just be, that I love you from across the circle or that hand on the back, but like some
Mhm.
level of holding, right? Because like I imagine a woman who's sitting in a story who or circle listening to a story like that who receives zero layers of support or acknowledgement
Mm.
can feel really alone.
Yeah.
Like that is a really strong
Yeah.
potentiality. And so yeah, I think that that's like that's there's a takeaway there for me, and I hope for for the listeners as well, of like holding
Absolutely.
grief doesn't have to be like having grief and the grieving woman always taking up all of the space,
Hmm.
right? But like to always, as a circle and as a community of women and sisters that care about each other, to always have those layers and to just be really aware, in these spaces, and to be observing the body language and the expressions, the subtleties that are in that circle, so
Hmm.
that we can all be doing our best to hold each other, and hold all of it, the good, the bad, the ugly, the indifferent, all of it.
Totally. Totally. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, there's just, and there isn't one right way, but I do
Right.
think that raw, transparent sharing, if there is like, hey, I'm so sorry if I hurt you. And I'm thinking
Right.
of even just going back to that initial story of your friend feeling really bad that she triggered this woman and she ended up getting up, leaving the circle, and just this, at least for me in my sphere and my world, I just I want to offer this contemplation. Like, what if triggering someone wasn't a bad thing? We
Right.
don't want to hurt anybody's feelings intentionally. We don't want to be unkind or inconsiderate. We don't want to lack compassion or curiosity. But what if triggering somebody wasn't bad or wrong? What
Yes,
if
I
it
love
was
this.
okay, you know? Because my friends trigger me all the time. When
Right.
they talk about birth or whatever, or, various things. And sometimes I'll hear somebody talk about birth in a very like, our bodies are made to birth. And I'm like, ooh, I get triggered. I'm like, okay, yes, and
Yeah.
shit happens too. And to
Right.
say a statement black and white like that is also false.
Right.
But I understand where it's coming from. Do you want to deepen in this conversation? Or
Right.
are you just saying this and throwing it away, right? And
Right.
recognizing like sometimes people do just need a breather to walk away and then come back.
Right.
And it doesn't have to be
Right.
about anybody else. It's just a thing that somebody's going through, and that's allowed.
Right. And so from this kind of perspective and our triggers are our
Mm.
treasures, I'm curious if you're open to me asking a potentially vulnerable
Oh my
question.
God, yes. Trigger me, baby.
Great. Let's see. Let's
Oh my
see.
God, I'm like nervous. I've got butterflies. Okay, what is the question?
Okay, so just today, once before the call and then as well in the call, you've mentioned something quite specific in terms of a trigger point. And that is, you have a friend who's currently pregnant,
Yeah.
and then you spoke into this woman who is at dancing the
Mhm,
Aphrodite's dance who was pregnant.
mhm,
And, I experience you as like being quite integrated in the realm of like of your birth and really able to speak about your birth and like tell that story.
mhm,
And so I'm curious what's there for you when it comes to pregnancy specifically.
mhm. It's a good question. Let me just take. Okay, full like roundabout way. I'm gonna start with this. This is a tattoo that says Zuiki, and it's an ancient Japanese Buddhist teaching that means to feel joy for another's joy, regardless of what it means for you. So this would look like you want to have a promotion, somebody else gets a promotion, you celebrate them, and you feel that joy for their successes, even though it means that you don't get that job.
Right.
And that was taught to me by um, my shiatsu teacher, who's a Buddhist monk, and I love him so dearly. He was amazing. And a bunch of us got that tattoo, and that's been a big practice in my life of can I feel joy for another's joy, regardless of what it means for me? Like separate myself from the equation. Can I feel that for someone? And I have wanted a baby for so long. That's what I've wanted for a very, very long time. And I was right there. And now I have a baby, but he's dead. And seeing another woman pregnant and celebrating pregnancy in a very light way brings up for me this inability to feel Zweaky, this inability to actually feel joy for this other woman because I want that so badly. And it's
Right.
not time in this moment, but I so badly want that. And I so badly wanted that. And to imagine a woman's, especially first baby, where there's this desire to not have any negative influences and this like, we're just going to celebrate without acknowledging the reality of like, hey, there's a lot of stuff that exists here. Like, pregnancy is a portal of the unknown. And part of that unknown has layers of grief and layers of death, whether you have a living child or not. And we've
Hmm.
spoken about this before in an
For sure.
episode where you have a living baby, there's still grief.
Right.
You only have living babies, there's still grief
For
for
sure.
various reasons. Um, and so for me, it brings up this inability to be able to have Zweiki fully because I get reminded of my own pregnancy journey and how much I loved that. And my pregnancy was the only time in my life that I got to actually interact with Floyd in life. And so I want to honor wherever a sister is at and not project my stuff because I want to show up. And I know that with this friend that is pregnant, I know I could show up like this and she would be totally fine. Um, and that my grief is welcome. But there is that piece of like, if I show up, I will be project. I'm bringing this with me, and that
Right.
doesn't feel fair to her,
Right.
who's in the middle of pregnancy. Whereas other friends of mine that have already given birth, I'm like, okay, I met your baby before Floyd passed, so I had even like a couple month long relationship with them beforehand, and I'm not watching you gestate and get ready, and as these women get bigger and bigger, they're getting closer to the birth portal, which is like the pinnacle of like, hey, I almost died. My child is dead. That spurred on a year-long journey of like surgeries and medical interventions, and like I was under anesthesia like what, 8 times in that year, like just beyond, like more, maybe 10. And while I have some pieces that are integrated, I still have so much that isn't, right? And so I think that's kind of what it brings up for me, um, in a lot of ways. I don't know if that fully
Do you
answered the question or not.
Yeah, 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 for sure. Do you feel like it then you've done more like integration work around the birth and that like maybe there is like the pregnancy is a space where you're moving more into now, like specifically, speaking into that layer of that was the only moment that you had to like physically interact with Floyd in this life and kind of these pieces because
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, I'm kind of curious like because it feels like you are more able to meet and interface with women's birth stories and like
Hmm.
birth experiences than you are just like the reflection of like a woman who is pregnant in front of you.
Yeah. Um, yeah. I mean, maybe I've had more experience dialoguing around birth because I've done that
Yeah.
most of my life.
Right,
Um, been researching that most of my life. But I
right.
am only recently being able to like go back in my camera roll on my phone and look at photos of me pregnant. That was a really
Uh-huh,
difficult thing to do for a
uh-huh.
long time. That was really, really difficult to look back and see this like excitement of, oh my God, I'm going to have a
Right,
baby. And then boom, and just this piece that's like not fully jaded, you know? And even that term, as I said it, is kind of interesting because jade is a precious stone. It is a stone that brings a lot of blessings and a lot of luck, right? And so even this idea of like, I remember right after he died, and I was like, I don't want to be jaded because of this. I don't want this to harden me. But maybe there's some beauty in being a little bit jaded because it turns something difficult into something precious, into something that could bring someone else luck. And I know so many women that have heard my story that then get to hold their living baby because they transferred to the hospital a bit sooner or whatever it might be, or a midwife made a call
right.
that like might have made a positive difference. Um, but I'm also next month I'm going to do my first EMDR session. And I'm going to be doing quite a few of those. And so I'm really hoping as well that that therapy, which is beyond talk therapy, it's something.
Something movement, I'm forgetting it as well
Yeah,
right
you
now.
basically, it's like a therapeutic practice where you sit and you move your eyes in specific ways, and it helps to sweep and organize the trauma in the brain. Um, and I'm hoping that will allow some organization in my psyche where I can better show up to all of these situations so my trauma can be more integrated in like a neurological capacity, not just in a talk therapy, I can hear your
Right,
story capacity. Because
right,
in these conversations, if I'm being 100% transparent, I'll hear someone talk and somebody will say something and I'll shut down for like a moment and then I catch myself and I have to bring myself out of it. Like these
right.
conversations do bring up a lot, but I'm
Of
also
course. Yeah.
aware that this is bigger than me, and that's what I'm rooted in Birth the Middle Way is this is not just about me, my trauma, my story, my son, I, me, my feelings, my anything. This is
Right,
about sharing information and stories that can help and positively influence the birth space and other women and midwives and birth keepers of all kinds, and maybe help other women who've had birth experiences integrate their journeys. So it's not just about me and my intimate relations,
right,
it's about
right.
it's
bigger.
so much
Yeah.
bigger. It's beyond me, and
Right.
I can show up to that.
Right.
I can show up in
Right.
service to that
Right.
more than I think I can show up in the intimate capacity of relationship where I'm like, oh my God, I would have loved to like be a mother alongside you.
Right.
I would
Totally.
have loved to
Totally.
like, and that was a big grief point with my local friends and I of we were gonna go to the beach
Mother.
together. We were
Hmm.
gonna be like mothers together. We were gonna laugh about, oh my God, we're not using cloth diapers right now. We thought we knew. Like we were gonna have all
Right.
of those things,
Totally.
like I was gonna do cloth diapers. I was set on that. And would I have actually never used a disposable diaper? Guaranteed I would have used a disposable diaper because
Right.
it's motherhood. It's messy. It's
Right.
not, you go
Right.
into it with
I
ideas,
literally just made a post about this on
you
Instagram
know?
around the topic of flexibility and rigidity in motherhood, and how I think a lot of mothers go in with rigid thoughts, and the actual act of motherhood calls for flexibility in realms we didn't
And
expect.
so
And
this is such a key piece. Like
yeah,
when people were telling me like, oh, it's her ego or she had flawed ideas about birth. I'm like, what fucking mother does not? What mother has
have flaws. Yeah,
ideas about birth and their or motherhood and then they're proven
or
wrong by the
motherhood,
lived
exactly.
experience? There's a certain
Hmm.
level of naivety that a pregnant woman carries because she has not yet traversed that portal. Whatever the outcome
Right.
is, however it happens, and there's a
Right.
certain naivety that, you know, the women that I know that have not walked the path of stillbirth or a dead child, they just don't know what it's like to mother in that way because that's
Right.
not their journey and that's fine. And
Right.
so I think that level of naivety as well in pregnancy and in the realm of like, pregnancy is beautiful. Look at this, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, and shit can happen. And I'm
Right.
not here to burst anyone's bubble or to like
Right.
push my stuff because again, my journey is unique and it's not very common. Like when
Right.
we looked at those percentages, it's not like there's 50% of women experiencing stillbirth. That's not the
Exactly.
reality. Like even in developing countries, I think the highest percent is 2%, and that's pushing
Mm.
it.
Right.
And so this is where I don't want to forcibly remove somebody's naivety because I think that piece of the unknown of the maiden to mother um, birthing process is important. And that piece of being naive and having it be unknown is really important. I think that is really important, you know,
Right.
and I don't want to make someone else's pregnancy about myself. That
Right.
doesn't feel that doesn't feel in integrity with me at all,
Right.
you
Right.
know?
Right. Which again, just,
Yeah.
you're such a beautiful woman and respectful, like that's beautiful. I mean, it is. I'm just gonna celebrate you in that wisdom and that perspective, and also really honor and validate, the pain that you're still processing and the work that you're still
Mhm.
doing, and the ways in which you're still showing up.
Yeah.
And so to just define MDMR, it's eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing.
Hmm.
And yes, exactly
Yeah.
that. It helps to kind of process the stagnant memories that are stuck in the brain by bringing up distressing memories. And then you do a bilateral stimulation, typically through guided eye movements, but sometimes through sounds or tapping. And I've seen that
It'll
as
be
well.
so fun.
It's going to be fun. And then reprocessing. So then you reprocess the memory so that its emotional charge is
Yeah.
reduced. Yeah, it's something I would love to study. It's
Hmm.
a beautiful technique.
Yeah. So I'm
Yeah.
hoping that will be supportive so I can show up. Um, just, yeah, I can show up with more regulation. I think that would be
Right.
the goal.
Right.
But, in this space and birth the middle way, I'm like, hey, I'm here. Like you asked, a question and I got emotional and that's
Of
like
course.
allowed in this space. And this is a space where we're having these conversations that are sometimes difficult, sometimes beautiful. Like I'm editing a
Right.
podcast right now. I cried throughout listening to that story, but it was beautiful and the outcome was
Right.
amazing. And I'm hoping that we have more of those stories as well because there are so
Sure.
many.
Right.
And I think it's also, this idea of like our society doesn't necessarily know how to hold grief because we don't know how to interact with death as a neutral and natural thing. We know
Right.
how to interact with death as a bad thing, especially if it happens to a young person or a baby and like they shouldn't have died. They died too soon. How horrible. And yes, it's painful. Yes, it's sad. And I'm only speaking from my perspective. Like, I'm not telling
Right.
anybody how to view death, but it is a naturally occurring thing that can happen at any point in the span of a life for reasons known
Right.
and unknown. And I think developing a relationship to death, whether it's mortal death or like death of an ego or an ending of a relationship or what, just releasing the idea that we have control, um, could also allow us to be okay when grief does reveal itself.
Right. Right. And what, when you say that, I would say for me, I would agree that death is a natural process. Neutral, I would advocate maybe like that doesn't resonate for me as much, like I would say that
And what
it's a
has
really
you say?
profound thing.
Yeah. So what has you say that it's not neutral?
I would say it's profound. Like I would say it's as profound as birth. So I'd say it's
Yeah.
natural, but neutral as just like kind of baseline. It doesn't bring up anything. Like even when I think of like a death or a rebirth process
Hmm.
in the psyche, I think that those are also almost always profound.
So what?
And they're,
Why can't profoundness and neutrality coexist? Why can't they exist within the same context of something?
I would say that they're paradoxical to each other.
But
That
can that
neutrality,
paradox not exist?
the paradox can exist, but to say that they're like equal or that I would use or like that they're in any way parallel, like that's the word you just used, right?
Uh,
Like I wouldn't say that they like stand next to each other looking each other in the eye. I would say when I feel neutral about something and when I feel something is profound, those like they aren't, it's like here.
right. So, okay, when I use the term neutral, just for like context sake, I'm talking about good and bad.
Uh-huh.
So I'm not talking
Okay.
about like my emotional response to them because I do agree birth and
Uh-huh.
death are both profound. But when I say neutral, I'm like, they're not good or
They're
bad.
not wrong or
They're not
right.
wrong or right. They're not good or
That
bad.
I can agree with.
They
Right.
exist
Right.
and they just
Right.
are. They are neutral
Right.
parts of the cosmos, of a fact of life. They are the bookends. They exist. They just are. Whether I am okay with them or not, or I'm traumatized by them or
Right.
not, that doesn't change their state. They exist. And they, for me,
Right.
my emotional response to them is that they are profound.
Right. Right.
100%.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's what I'm
So,
saying is not
yeah.
like I feel neutral about death and it's doesn't matter. Like, no, 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 no. Of course
Right.
not. Like I'm grieving. I'm like
Right.
emotional all the time.
Right. Of
Yeah.
course. Of course. Of
Yeah.
course. Yeah. Yeah. So I can agree with that reframe for sure.
Hmm.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, thank you for allowing me to ask the vulnerable question and thank
Yeah.
you for sharing and yeah, I mean I really get it and I
Hmm.
honor that process for sure and even just, specifically the reframe around like birth being a broader, conversation and I think like in this podcast, I just feel called to plant this seed because I feel like in this podcast we very much so have spoken around, the theme of how many women out there like have these unintegrated traumatic birth experiences,
Hmm.
and even kind of speaking to this like the pregnancy piece as well, in terms of like, I feel like when you highlighted like birth is kind of a bigger conversation. Like there's like more happening there. There's more happening in the birth world. I would also advocate that I do hold the prayer that more is happening in the realm of pregnancy in terms of like a wider spectrum of care and specifically psychological spiritual care that can really help prepare women and to meet women there. And so I just want to again plant the seed for any women who's listening who, feels like you are existing in either one of those realms
Hmm.
and just highlight that that is something that I love to meet and love to walk with women through is both the integration of any birth experience. It does not only have to be traumatic or it doesn't have to be severely traumatic. Like we've spoke so many times on this podcast around those micro griefs,
Hmm.
right? And I think that also it's so, so crucial that to be fully alchemizing ourselves through our pregnancy, birth, and postpartum experience, we meet all those layers. And specifically, we meet those layers of grief,
Yeah.
like, and really honor them, and really start to normalize them. And as well, in the realm of pregnancy, like there's so much that can be done beyond testing your blood and having an ultrasound and understanding what week gestation you're at and
Hmm.
testing your blood sugar and these types of things. Like sure, that can serve a purpose for women who feel called to walk that path, and like to really meet yourself and to meet your emotional realm and to meet your psychological realm and your belief systems, and the little nuanced things that pregnancy can bring up as a mirror, for lack of better words. I really absolutely love working with women
Hmm.
in those spaces. And so just, for any woman listening who may feel called to dive deep into the realms of pregnancy or postpartum integration, and that could even be if you are 25 years postpartum. Like, oh my God, that would excite me so much. I would absolutely
Hmm.
calling that in to really, wow, to go back and like, look at a birth that maybe was 25 years ago and you have a
Hmm.
grown child and really, give yourself the space to process. Like, oh wow, it's
Yeah,
like a dream come true, prayer come true for sure. So
absolutely.
just to plant those seeds of like, this is a space and like this prayer that Emma and I are, activating in just these conversations of what birth the middle way is. It's very much so also from this question and this curiosity of like, how can we build a community
Hmm.
and create space for everyone's roles, and
Right.
and so calling on like in our guests as well. That's why we're always asking like, how can people find you? How can they reach out?
Hmm.
How can they access your services? Because it's about broadening our spectrum of care and the processes around our care. I think that really is foundational for what Birth the Middle Way is trying to activate. It's, stepping outside of what is just normal in the systematic industrial care model at this point, and understanding that because birth and pregnancy and postpartum are such grandiose, complex, nuanced things that are so personal and individual to each woman and each
Hmm.
family, that we need to broaden. We need such a bigger spectrum so that every woman can really tailor her care, right?
Hmm.
And be like, I pick this and this, and it's like, making one of those the charm bracelets
Yeah.
from back in the 90s.
Yes.
That's
Oh my
literally the
gosh.
vision
Yeah.
that just
The,
came
like
to my
little like
mind. Like, what
rectangle like
charms do I
silver
want to?
ring.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. The bow and
Yeah, yeah,
the
yeah. Totally. Well, and
yeah,
recognizing too that we don't like community over comparison. Like
right,
your story, you don't need to compare it, your pregnancy journey, you don't need to compare it to
exactly,
somebody else's. You don't need to compare your
exactly,
grief to my grief. You don't need to compare your
exactly.
beautiful birth to Sam's beautiful birth. And I'm really looking forward to the episodes where you share
Yeah,
your birth stories. I'd love to hear them individually because
yeah,
they carry different medicine and like, and I remember when I read your birth story with Sunny, and that was
right,
amazing. Like the things that you heard from the midwives that you spoke to, like it's all the whole journey of it was so
right,
incredible. And I would love to hear it. And I know that there's many other women that would love to hear those stories too. But like moving into this Pluto and Aquarius space that we're now in, right? That's really focusing in on community. And community doesn't mean I have the answers or Sam has the answers or you have the answers. Community
right,
means coming together in circle, bringing our medicine, our wisdom, our insight,
right,
what we know and what we don't, bringing our
right,
stories forward, not
right.
comparing them, not making one better or one worse or, oh, she just got lucky. No,
No,
there's nuance and beauty in all of these things. And Birth the Middle Way
right,
welcomes all of that, all of it,
right,
all of it.
exactly,
That's why we're here.
exactly,
Like every
totally.
time we sit in these conversations, I envision like us sitting around a fire with like all these women and we're talking and I just,
Laughing and crying
yeah,
and
and
praying
drumming.
and singing
Yeah,
and
like
yeah.
passing around a mapacho and like just that's just what I envision. I envision us together, like on the beach or in the forest, it had just rained, and I just envision us together
It will
sharing
happen.
with one another and being women. We're probably naked. Like, I'm just like envisioning all of these things. And
And I'm probably taking photos of
yeah,
us all. Because if
exactly.
women are naked, we must make art
We
out
must
of
make
it.
art covered in clay and mud and like, it's just
Yeah.
amazing. So, but just this togetherness and knowing that we don't
Right,
have to be the same and we won't be the same. And one
right,
woman's pregnancy won't be the same as another woman's pregnancy. And the sister that I've
right,
shared today, like the story of us on the bed crying, and like her
right.
pregnancy was awful. She hated it. She was sick. She was like, I feel big. I don't like it. And I'm just sitting like massive, like, I love this. I could be pregnant forever. Like, this is
Oh my God.
amazing. And
Yeah.
then I had like the worst birth in the world. And she had
Right,
such a beautiful birth,
right,
and it's just
right,
like, what the fuck?
right,
And
right.
that's just like the
Totally.
complexities and the mysteries of being a woman, and I
Right.
think of our ancestors and not one generation back. I'm thinking like 400, 500 years back, more and more and more, and how we could sit in circles and there could be space for all of it. And it was welcomed. And there was no hierarchy. It wasn't yours is better, yours is worse, yours is here, yours is here. No, we can just all listen because there is medicine found in joy and in grief. There is medicine found in birth and in death. Period. Full stop. Right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And so how can we bring those circles and bring these processes forward, and even when you say that, I'm like, wait, I bet you there's always been pockets of women who were
Well,
activating
what
in
about
this
this? Yeah.
always. Like, you're going back all these years, I'm like,
Yeah.
but there was probably always some of us,
Hmm.
like holding on to the, for dear life,
Yeah.
or what we have always felt in our bones,
Yeah.
the women who are, like connected to the earth and in prayer,
Totally.
what we've always felt is
Yeah.
possible.
And so if you're
And I feel
here
like,
and you're listening also, we're sharing these ideas and these ponderings and musings, but I am curious if any of the listeners, if any of you guys have ever been in these circles and you felt the guilt or the shame for having a really positive birth story or triggering somebody, or if you've experienced loss in pregnancy or birth or postpartum,
or any
or
level of birth
any level
trauma.
of birth trauma, if you felt that there wasn't space, or if you felt uncomfortable or you resonate with something that I've said and the spaces where I get triggered, do you get triggered in different spaces? How have you navigated it? How has your community
Right.
held you or not?
Right.
Um,
And
yeah.
what do you think are some solution based like
Yes.
things? Like I'd love to hear a conversation in the comment section of
Yeah.
this podcast. And so just to plant the seed for anyone who's potentially listening to the episodes on Spotify,
Hmm.
if you go over to Substack,
Hmm.
there will be like all of our episodes are with a video and there's a whole conversational thread under them. And so there is a space to really actually actively join the
Hmm.
conversations for all of the episodes. And
Yeah.
so, I think that that's a seed that we should plant semi-regularly, just depending on, which platform is being accessed. And
Totally.
so please join us in the conversation. Please bring forward your ideas, your
Hmm.
inspiration, your thoughts, your own triggers, your own ideas. Like we would love to
Judgments.
judgments.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, bring it
Yeah.
forward,
Because I'm
please.
curious, like, do you have any tools or tips or tricks on like how to hold your grief when you're in a public setting? Because I'll just
Right,
burst out into tears. Like, I'll just cry. And I'm not wailing or
right.
anything, but
The tears
is that
fall.
okay? Is that not? Is that like, how do you do it? Like, I'm just sharing how I do it. And I don't know if that's right
Right,
or wrong. It's just what I'm doing. So I'm
right.
curious.
Exactly.
Yeah. And like, in spaces like blessing ways, like the one that you were describing, like that's just a difficult situation. And how,
Right.
I don't know, I'm curious, like, how would you as a listener navigate something like that? Because I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of the woman who's had a really positive birth experience, and I know that my mom had a really great birth experience. And a lot of people just told her, well, you had a home birth. Oh, you were lucky. Oh, it could have been so bad. Or my pregnancy was bad. And I'm wondering if she's had those experiences. Did she
Yeah,
feel shame or guilt or like, ooh, maybe I shouldn't talk about my great birth experience where my daughter's healthy and there were no
right,
complications? And should I talk about that, knowing
right.
that this woman had preeclampsia and had to have an emergency cesarean or experienced this or whatever it might have been, right? And so, yeah, I mean, I think there's just space for all of it. And I am just curious by nature. So if you're listening,
For sure.
what are like, yeah, I want to know what you think.
Yeah, please. Please, yeah, I was told on repeat I was lucky, and for me I'm like, but like I would be so curious. I wish we could know, because the hospital
Mm.
system doesn't in most of the Western world, to my understanding, like doesn't orient towards even allowing the attempt of specifically a physiological birth.
Right.
And so like what is the actual statistics around if we were to leave breech birth untouched, how many of them pass through the canal safely and
Totally.
how many don't? Like, was I actually just really lucky, or are we also dancing with most of the time breech birth
Oh, and
will
I'm so
happen?
curious, like, what kind of breach was it? Because there's different kinds of breach. Did you
Right.
know she was breech? Like, all of these things
I
that,
Yeah,
like, I'm like, ooh, I think we should
yeah, we
wait.
can get into
Yeah,
it.
because
We
I
can get
want to
into
hear the
it.
fullness of like your
Yeah.
journey, what got you to decide what you decided, and like,
Right.
I'm
Right.
stoked, really stoked to
Right.
hear
Great.
all of
You
that.
can interview me. I like that style. I'm really good at
Oh my
answering
God, I'm
questions.
gonna interview the shit out of you.
Yeah.
But we also need to do the stories because I do want to
Um,
read the
for
stories at some
sure.
point too. So
For
yeah, and
sure.
we can have Sunny and Sage for story time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Bring
For
your
sure.
babies in spirit or
Yeah.
alive, and
Yeah.
we'll
We have so many
take
things
the
to do. We
stories.
also have an exciting lineup with
We
some
do.
guests that we will be having on the
Yeah,
podcast and some upcoming episodes.
yeah.
So yeah, stay tuned. Birth the Middle Way is blossoming in big ways. We're
It's
excited.
welcoming, and we love you. We'll
Yeah.
see you in the next one.
Have a beautiful day.